Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Panels by Inside Towers. We're glad you could join us today. I'm John Celentano, business editor at Inside Towers, the newsletter that magically appears in your inbox every morning with the latest wireless infrastructure news. Our topic today is COVID-19 and network deployment. This discussion is very timely. We are just now getting second quarter results from a number of carriers and their suppliers. At this juncture, we as an industry have experienced one full quarter of operations since the pandemic hit in March. So we have the advantage of seeing how network deployments have been affected and what, if any, changes or adjustments have been made, and which ones may stay. And more important, where do we go from here? I'm pleased to host a panel of industry veterans from a cross-section of disciplines to bring their perspectives to the topic. Before I introduce our panel, a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for replay. We'll let you know when it is posted to our website. All attendees are on mute. We welcome all questions that you may have throughout the discussion. If you have a question, use the Q&A tab on the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. We will get to as many questions as time allows. Know that we will answer all your questions afterwards and we'll post our panelists' response to your questions on our website at a later date. This webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, give or take a few minutes. Now let's meet our panel. We have with us today Michael Hill from ExteNet, John Lamond with GME Supply, Joe Cecin with Hylan, and Giuseppe Incitti with Sitetracker. Gentlemen, I'd like you to introduce yourselves and give us a high-level background on each of your companies and the role you have in the wireless industry. Michael, why don't you start us off here? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. Welcome. I'm Michael Hill. I am Assistant General Counsel for Regulatory Affairs for ExteNet. ExteNet Systems is a leading national provider of converged wireless infrastructure and services. What that means is we primarily build indoor and outdoor wireless networks for the major carriers, for building owners, and for enterprise business solutions as well. We've been around since 2003, and I run the team that's in charge of securing all of our necessary rights and entitlements to construct our networks, primarily on the outdoor side.
Very good. John?
Sure, happy to be on board as well. I'm the National Sales Director with GME Supply. Our mission is pretty simple. We want to keep workers safe and productive in the field. We are North America's premier outfitter of fall protection and safety equipment. I would say what diversifies us from others is that we have a training program in-house called Gear Experts, which trains our employees as if they were field workers, allows us to become an extension of people's businesses, and what we are excited most about is being able to provide essential services to essential workers. And that's kind of why we're here to discuss stuff today.
Very good. Welcome. Joe, why don't you give us the rundown on Hylan?
Yeah, thanks, John. My name is Joe Cecin, CEO of Hylan. I've been with the company about 2 years, been CEO for the last year. Hylan is a diversified builder of communications infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, and smart city infrastructure across the country. The core business, Hylan Datacom and Electrical, has been in business for 60 years. About 4 years ago, we received an investment from private equity, which allowed us to expand what we do nationwide. So we now have operations in New York, Chicago, and the greater Midwest, Arizona, California, and the DC metro area. And the bulk of what we do is build communications infrastructure on behalf of carriers and infrastructure providers.
Very good. Thank you. Giuseppe.
Great. Thanks, John. Giuseppe Incitti, CEO of Sitetracker. Sitetracker is a software platform focused on helping folks who deploy telecommunication infrastructure track everything associated with doing that. We have about 100 customers today, and we help mobile network operators, tower companies, fiber companies, and contractors, again, operate more efficiently. That gives us a pretty unique view into what's going on, across the space. And again, really focused on making the end users more productive, ultimately to help these businesses run better.
This is great. We have a great mix of experience and knowledge, and that we want to tap all of that as part of this discussion. So let's kick it off. Share with us how you have managed your business since the pandemic hit, and highlight maybe what the biggest issues or challenges have been for you up to date. Michael, why don't you start us off here?
Sure. So I think, like everybody, we encountered some initial hiccups once the scope of the pandemic became clear, and once we started seeing national closures. One of the biggest issues we faced on a going forward basis was access to sites, both on the ground and also to buildings. As you might imagine, when we had the closure orders issued, crews started encountering difficulties of actually getting access to the right of way, to the poles we were doing work on. And on the indoor side, we had just buildings shut down for access. But through working with the property owners and working with local municipalities to provide proof of our essential infrastructure provider status as certified by the Department of Homeland Security, we found that we were able to largely continue our operations for the most part. And on the indoor side, having an empty building actually made deployment easier. I hate to say that there's an upside to all this, but that has been beneficial in our activities. As far as our internal operations, ExteNet has a widely dispersed employee base. We already have lots of folks working from home around the country. So we largely already had the infrastructure in place to just continue that on a slightly enlarged scale. As restrictions have been eased in some locations over the past few weeks, we have been reopening our offices. We have distributed personal protection equipment to all of our employees. We did that early on for the folks in the field, and now we're doing it for the folks who are working remotely from home still as well.
It seems like in all of this, access to facilities, either tower sites or in building, has been one of the big issues. Joe, have you found similar instances where you're unable to actually get in the building, even though it may be a good time to do the work?
Yeah, just like Michael said, we did, especially early on, run into some circumstances where buildings were shut down. We were not allowed access. The benefit for Hylan is the bulk of what we do is outside. We do a lot of outside plant work, although we do inside as well. We're doing a few malls in California, for example. So what we were running into were street closures, permitting issues, moratoria declared by various municipalities, and then some customers just wanting to shut the project down given the uncertainty, didn't want a lot of people on site. So that was more prevalent early on. I think that some of that has calmed down, and we've seen a bit more regularity to building access, and permits are starting to flow again. So I think there was a bit of reaction early on to trying to assess the scope of the situation, but things have gotten a lot better since the last weeks of March and the first weeks of April.
We did have a question come in regarding the permitting and the timing, and what have you done, or what could be done to help speed up that process?
Yeah, I'll let Michael answer the bulk of this because I know he's knee deep in it. But from Hylan's perspective, listen, permits have been a source of concern and delay even prior to COVID. So our customers want us to build the infrastructure quickly, and we do that as quickly as we can. Oftentimes we're held up because of a permitting and approval process. That unfortunately got worse in my experience during COVID, where you had a lot of government workers work.
Okay, we'll wait for Joe to come back, but we'll carry on the conversation. John, how about giving us your perspective of what have you run into, and how have you dealt with it?
Sure. I think we tried to do our best to measure what's important for our staff internally with our offices across the country, as well as being able to support the contractors that expect the same level of need and service that we've provided in the past. And knowing that they've had travel restrictions, finding restaurants, finding hotels, that kind of struggle that they've faced, we've had to work to understand their struggles, what we can do from an efficiency standpoint from our warehouse to make things easier for them, and then making sure our internal staff is comfortable. So we transitioned out of the office briefly, with the exception of our warehouse, and then seamlessly transitioned back a few weeks later once some restrictions in our different areas were lifted, without our customers really seeing much of that at all. They didn't experience any hiccups. So that part was good. Unfortunately for the contractors, they struggle with regional restrictions and issues that it can affect their daily world, and our ability to understand and execute what they need from us on a daily basis has been a real challenge.
Now, you supply a lot of gear and protective equipment for the workers too, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I mean that as they travel, that meets them at a lot of job sites. So if they're restricted from getting in somewhere, or if a crew is shut down because of a COVID issue, things change and shipments can be on their way. And our flexibility and resiliency has been really important to the customer base to make sure they get what they need.
Yeah, friends I have who work for suppliers and distributors, they say they can ship, but the customer's not always there to receive it. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
and then the shipping challenges that go along with that. The freight carriers have had their own challenges with COVID.
Yeah. Hey Joe, we got you back.
Sorry about that, guys. Network glitch or something. We need to build more infrastructure.
I know a guy.
Giuseppe, you have your company provides software tools to help streamline the deployment process. What have you seen through this past quarter? How that's benefited people in the field, or other impacts that they may be dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing we saw was a spike in call volumes, on the support side, for folks saying, "Hey, the game has changed. I need to know where I can work when efficiently, so I could route my resources to the right areas to hopefully continue to invoice and operate my business." So what we saw, was a spike in folks looking for, help and creativity to manage this situation. And we found that folks who invest the most in their permitting databases and really tracking all their activities to jurisdictions and keeping great records, reacted pretty positively considering the circumstances, and knew where they could work when. And some other folks who might be jotting those notes down on a notepad or on a whiteboard, struggled a bit, right? And then we saw folks quickly realize that there was going to be a new way to work, while everyone's at home, and how we're going to have to communicate. And folks, I think sprinted towards the new way to work just to keep operating. So we helped as much as we could, but it was just amazing to see the solutions that people were building on the fly to keep working, while processing real-time information, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So it was pretty crazy to be involved while we were, moving about 200 people to go work from home while taking these requests, right? So,
Well, that would seem like there's no going back from that to some extent. Is that right? Where once they adapt a streamlined platform or a streamlined way of documenting what they're doing in the field, chances are they're not going to go back to the old way of doing things. Would you say?
Yeah, I think, we're hearing people say, "Hey, here's where this forced us to be better. We knew we were headed this way, and it just, caused us to do it earlier." So in many cases, it was a catalyst for people making changes they were already, wanting to make. And, in some ways that was good for us. But it was a catalyst for things they knew they needed to do, right? If there was an old on-premise system that folks couldn't access, it really mattered in March and April, if you couldn't just go on a browser and log in. So it acted as a bit of a catalyst, and we tried to help as much as we could. But I was just amazed by how people rallied to continue to do work. So it was really impressive to watch.
Were there any, I'll throw it out to the others, any other unexpected opportunities that came out of this that you maybe did not anticipate going into it?
I think for us, the development of the ability to train remotely with workers in the field is something that we hadn't, it seemed so important previously to be able to train telecom workers that, in person in front of them, and the development of some online training that can be very, very effective for to allow people to get new personnel on up to speed, get some of that experience that they might not have otherwise, and have time to do it if they were shut down or locked in somewhere. And that was really effective. So the growth of virtual training and online training seems to be a jumping point for some benefit.
Again, it may be something that continues, right? It's not
Sure.
an interim solution. Once you adapt it, it seems like it has a role going forward.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I'll add to that on the permitting side of things. I'll say that it's improvements to the overall process and the overall mode of contact with municipalities and other interested parties. Because we've seen a number of cities now allow, where previously you had to go in and actually go to a desk and leave hard copies on the desk with somebody.
Right.
That's a lot more difficult nowadays. So they've moved toward full electronic acceptance of applications, which has been phenomenal. Saves everybody a lot of time. It's easier to exchange copies. Similarly, we've seen city councils, zoning boards of appeal, plan commission, et cetera, move to virtual meetings. And that's something I think is going to continue. There was great reluctance to do that prior to this emergency. Various cities were in different points in progress toward that. But I think that's something that's going to survive the emergency, as well as the electronic submission of applications. And that just speeds everything up for everyone involved. So that's a great opportunity that came out of it.
Is that, Michael, are you finding that that's a little bit spotty, or is it across the board, or I mean, are all the municipalities moving this way, or?
I would say generally all municipalities are making some progress. The level of progress varies across the board. The larger cities, typically the larger cities are making the most advancements, and sometimes those are some of the hardest processes and hardest organizations to change. But we've seen a great interest in ability to continue operations despite the emergency. Where we've encountered continuing difficulties are the smaller localities.
Sure.
It's the same issues, but I'll say that those are the same issues we face outside of an emergency. Staffing levels, the ability to get time commitment to review applications. Those are issues we face with the smaller localities anyway. They've just been exacerbated by the emergency.
Joe, you mentioned the fact that a lot of buildings were vacant allowed you to do work inside them. It's kind of a nice opportunity that you probably didn't really think about ahead of time, right?
Well, one unexpected positive was, we do a lot of work in New York City, and with the city effectively shut down, we were essential workers working on critical infrastructure. So obviously we're allowed to continue. But our crews didn't have to deal with a lot of the traffic issues and parking issues. And, it was a very unexpected, outcome where, guys were able to get to the job sites a lot quicker and didn't have parking hassles trying to find somewhere to go.
You're going to be spoiled when New York gets back to normal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, very good.
I'll also echo that. New York and in Boston too. Boston.
Yeah.
It's been good. Yeah.
Well, we have a poll we'd like to pose to our audience to see from them how COVID-19 has affected their business. So I'm going to ask my assistant here to post the poll, and everybody will get a chance to vote. And we'll give it a few seconds, and then we'll see the results, and we can comment on that. All right. Well, there you see the results. This business is down somewhat, but they're adjusting. A lot of work from home applications. A third of the audience says business as usual. That's encouraging. And then on either end, business actually has grown and or it's way off. So thank you, audience, for your feedback. Any thoughts or comments on the results here, gentlemen?
I think it speaks to the essential, critical nature of what we do. And yeah, I think that this emergency that we've all gone through, this national unplanned comprehensive test of our wireless connectivity, really drives home the importance of it into all sectors of society and the economy.
Right.
As people are working from home with distance learning, everything touches what we do in some fashion.
Yeah, and the strain that's been put on the networks themselves with having everybody being at home, I think it's pretty awesome how the industry has reacted to not only push forward some projects that needed to happen that were new, but also maintain networks that have seen traffic like they've never seen before. So as we continue to do that, that shows some real strength in our industry as a whole.
I think it speaks well of the quality of the networks and the resilience they have. I think I can only remember maybe one incident was reported that there were some outages, but other than that, both the communications network and the electrical grid have held up well. Very good. Okay.
Yeah, John, I'll just add a comment to the poll that something we saw that was interesting was maybe in the April-May timeframe, folks were dealing with an impact to their immediate business while working on more RFPs than they've ever worked on ever before. So they had some, I think, timeline challenges where they're saying, hey, today it's tough, but I'm planning to never, I'm having more work than I've ever had to do in the fall. So watching, folks deal with that was interesting. So, and you can see today a lot of people are hiring despite business being no better. But I think folks are expecting a lot of work to come out and try and keep their workforce in order to deal with it.
Very good. So, where are we now? What is, from your own business's perspective? What's your current state of affairs, and is there a new normal that you're operating under? Or you made some intimations that yes, that's the case, but where are we now with having lived through this now for 4 months going on 5? Feels like a year, but Joe, why don't you give us an update on where you're at?
Sure. So John, I think again in the early days there was a lot of adjustment as we were reacting to the severity and the widespread nature of the pandemic. We were dealing with new work rules. One of the things about Hylan is about 3/4 of our people are field employees. They cannot work remotely, so they're out in the field doing what they do every day, and the safety of those employees was paramount to us. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to procure enough PPE and sanitizer. We had to change work rules to make sure that the employees would social distance wherever possible, would sanitize equipment after every shift. So there was a lot of adjustment early on, mostly focused on worker safety. I think now, 4 months in, that's become somewhat of the new normal, and we've continued to work apace. So, I think the adjustments were a lot more early on. We were dealing with rules by state that were changing. It almost seemed like on daily or every other day basis, rules were changing. So we had to stay on top of it. I made sure that our executive team and the division leadership were talking very frequently. We were doing calls twice a week, making sure that we were tracking what was going on in our business and the health and safety of our employees. Fortunately, our folks did a tremendous job. Even though we were working in the ground zero of the pandemic, if you will, in New York City, we had very few positive cases, and fortunately all of those were very mild symptoms, and most of those folks have returned to work. So I think because of the diligence of our people and staying on top of it, we were able to work through and get to where we are now, where I think, as Michael said, or maybe it was Giuseppe, we're seeing a lot of demand that has not changed. Our customers have a lot of infrastructure requirements that preceded COVID. And to the earlier point, I think everybody working remotely and the stresses on the networks have proven that the networks are built well, but we need more and more infrastructure. And I think we're still fairly early in that build cycle. When you talk about things like 5G, we're still fairly early.
Sure. Other comments?
I'd list our status and our contractor's status as currently hard at work. I think that things haven't stopped. One of the challenges has been being able to source new equipment we might not have been asked for previously, which includes everything from wipes to shields that depending on regional requirements. And, you know, supporting essential workers, we had little choice but to identify those categories that, and our purchasing team did a great job of doing that. But we needed to make sure that depending on where they're at and what their requirements were, what the restrictions were to get things done, we had to make that happen quickly. And so there was no choice but to do so. The one choice we did make, and I hope it's what others in the industry did as well, is to pass that through. If this is an unknown expense, a surprise expense, people's budgets this year, is to pass that cost through very minimally and continue to do what we do at our core, which is provide equipment that is more related to safety and productivity, and continue to do that, but help them lessen the blow of all these new restrictions, all the new things that have been put on their plate, as well as understand the regional challenges that they face, which can be very different whether you're in California or New York, or even what area of those states you're in.
Right.
So as much understanding as we could put forward, and as much investment time-wise and understanding-wise we could put into their business.
Very good. We have one question here regarding carrier spending. We know from some of the quarterly calls, some carriers have upheld their guidance for the year. Others have removed it altogether, and others have made some adjustments. From the customers and the carriers you deal with, what kind of indicators are you getting as far as their spending plans for the balance of the year and into 2021?
I'll kick that off, John. I mean, like I said before, we are seeing a very high level of demand from our customers to continue to build infrastructure. You know, the analogy I use, if you talk about 5G, I think we're in maybe the second inning of that build out. So, and that preceded COVID. It's going to continue. You know, we're participating in a great expansion of communications infrastructure that I think will go on for years, quite frankly. So we'll have some, you know, interim bumps. You know, carriers will adjust spending depending on their demand, but fundamentally, I think the build will continue. You know, we've been seeing a lot of, I think somebody mentioned, you know, RFPs and new business. We've been seeing a lot of RFPs for new construction. There are new fiber entrants entering the market who are building network. And our core customer base, which are the largest carriers in the country and the infrastructure providers, have not pulled back significantly, in my view.
Very good.
Yeah, I can echo that. We were seeing the same, especially from the larger carriers. And we're at the very beginning of 5G deployment. So interest is strong and demand is quite high for that. So I expect that to continue. Despite
what you see on the commercials, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, but we're going to get there. We're seeing that now, and I expect that to continue well into the future. We'll get past any hiccups we're encountering right now, but the commitment is definitely there for the long term.
And it seems like it's across the board. I mean, all the major carriers certainly, and even the regional carriers are moving in the same direction, albeit at a little different pace. But I think the direction is clear, and how they deploy, I guess, gets down to markets and regions. But
and also, John, you know, I think the work from home dynamic has also highlighted the need to increase spending in rural broadband. So you're seeing a new round of federal stimulus for rural broadband construction. So I think across the board, there's going to be that demand, and we'll be building for a while.
Yeah, it felt like Q1 and Q2 might have been more of maintenance, and Q3 and Q4, from what we're hearing, is more like growth. And it seems like that's the direction it's headed. It is very regionally based, but you know, it's exciting times to know that hopefully we're turning a corner and coming out of what just happened the last 2 months, and did it with as much success as we did.
Right, very good. Certainly having a perspective and better tools to work with helps streamline all of that process as well. And the work from home, we heard stories earlier on about, the shift in traffic from core metro areas to the suburbs, as a big driver in all of that. And in some cases, they had to beef up the capacity in those areas. So. Okay, let me check for any more questions from our audience. We have some very good ones that I don't know if you want to talk about particular customers. I think I'll defer that one for the time being, but we did have a question about a specific carrier, and I'm not going to put you on the spot to comment on that, but we will get an answer for that individual. It seems like fiber deployments are going hand in hand with the cell site deployments. Are you seeing that in a lot of cases that they're running pretty much neck and neck with each other, or do you see an emphasis on one that'll play catch up with the other going forward?
I'll take that to start. Listen, 5G and small cell doesn't work without fiber, period, full stop. The whole goal of 5G is to get closer and closer, get the antennas closer and closer to the end unit.
Right.
So if you think about deployment in a major metro area, those antennas are going to be every couple hundred feet. So and when you talk about the throughputs that the carriers need for 5G networks, you got to have fiber. So you can't have one without the other. I think there's going to be supplements done to backbone and distribution networks, but there's certainly going to be a lot of fiber at the point of the sword where people are getting onto the infrastructure.
Yeah, I would just add it's our busiest domestic segment is fiber. So it seems like the most active group in every region and really driving a lot of activity for us. So completely echo what Joe is saying, and we're seeing it in kind of every nook and cranny of the US right now.
Yeah, and fiber deployments as well are not always tied. They're not necessarily tied to a cell site. I mean, there's a lot of fiber deployment just for broadband in throughout metro areas and residential areas and the like, and we see that continuing as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we do both. We do small cell node deployment. We also do fiber and solely fiber deployment in some situations, and we're busy on both ends there.
I think you're seeing some companies diversify into both too that might not have done both in the past, but with the evolution of 5G are deciding that that's something that they need to do as well.
When we talk infrastructure companies, we're not just talking the carriers. The tower companies as well have a big role in all of this at the macro level and at the small cell level as well. Okay, good. Let me check our question and answer line one more time. Okay. We have another question that pertains to whether you perceive that the carriers have an advantage or at a disadvantage in this unusual time. We see a lot of them are trying to stay the course with their plans, but I'm wondering, has this been a catalyst again, as you mentioned earlier, that to make changes, or is this we just kind of muddled through it, business as usual?
I think it's a bit of both. They obviously want to monetize the impact of 5G. It's tougher to do that in this time period. So instead, they're pausing with some of the CapEx spend, and they can look back at reducing some costs. Having an excuse to pause and do that is definitely to their advantage. But the continued rollout of 5G to the consumer is a disadvantage in the fact that if it's slowed at all by what's going on, that's not something that they want to see. So it may be a little bit of both.
Very good.
Yeah, on our end, I would say we're being invited to speak to a lot of them about a new tool set for tomorrow. So I don't think they would be doing that work unless they were planning for a new reality. So we're pretty optimistic around what's around the corner, because I think they are planning for a higher volume of activity, which Who knows when? Maybe it'll be fall. Maybe
I was just going to say the timing is, the timing is off. Eh?
Yeah, but I don't think they would invite us in for the conversation. As well as others, unless they were getting ready for some real volume increase. We think it's around the corner.
Very good. Okay, good.
Yeah, and luckily, business as usual is growth, so and has been for quite some time. So even under a worst case scenario, business as usual scenario, we're still seeing a lot of growth, a lot of activity from all the carriers, and we're seeing, I think, an increase in interest and activity as we prepare for wide scale 5G deployment. And I think that is coming soon. We're seeing the indications of that already.
Yeah, certainly the push is on through the end of the year if conditions are favorable, and could be next year, starting early in the new year, could be a big year for the industry. So in that line, in the expectations and looking forward for your own businesses, you're seeing a lot of questions and interest now. You're busy now. Do we see this continuing in the face of the pandemic? Hopefully it subsides to some extent and goes away eventually. But looking forward, what kind of plans or outlook do you have towards the end of the year and into the new year?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first, but our assumption is there'll be kind of rolling brownouts throughout the U.S. for flares and, interesting news, especially in the winter. We're expecting a lot of interesting news. Likely to be working from home up until next year, but still hiring and growing staff along the way, because we do think, the folks on this call and their customers are going to be busier. So we expect to be, up from last year and continue to invest in the business. Are expecting a lot of work to come out in the fall and winter.
Good.
Yeah, I think Giuseppe's spot on. We'll see rolling impacts as hotspots flare up. For example, up until recently, our operations on the West Coast and the Southwest were not really impacted very much. Now, unfortunately, Arizona and California are seeing some flare ups. So we'll see those impacts, through the year. But on a macro basis, I think the trend is up and to the right. Like we talked about earlier, I think we're at the beginning of a large and long build cycle. So very, very bullish on the industry and our ability to participate and build network.
Michael?
I'll say that we got back up to near full capacity in our operations very shortly after the onset of the emergency. And that's where we still are. And I think that we're going to stay at that level for the foreseeable future. We, as I mentioned, we already had a widely dispersed workforce, so working from home was nothing new for a lot of our folks. Our offices have opened to some extent, but it's been on a voluntary basis, half capacity. It hasn't really affected our ability to get our work done. And our crews in the field have been active throughout. Once we got over the initial hurdles of establishing our right of access, the essential nature of the work we're performing, and working with municipalities to gain access. Once we go over some of the initial hiccups of how do you actually get approvals in the middle of a shutdown, we've had great success ever since then. So we're going to continue to see, of course, we're going to continue to see flare-ups, and I hope we don't see the worst of some of what's been predicted for the winter. But we'll encounter difficulties here and there, setbacks here and there. But overall, I think that we're going to be able to continue operating as we have been throughout.
You mentioned growth. Do you weigh growth in terms of top line or people or both? Do you see it growing your staff and workforce through this as we come out on the other end of it, or?
It's a little bit of both. I'll say, yeah, I'm not as close to that as some of the folks in ExteNet, but I know that we've actually made hires during the emergency.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that that's going to continue. The demand is there.
Yeah. So the answer to the question of is it revenue or people growth? The answer is yes. One of the things actually that does predate COVID is our ability to find skilled labor to do the work in the field. It's very challenging. You know, fiber splicers don't grow on trees and need a little bit of training. So we continue to, you know, bring people in and train them. We look for skilled labor. There's a lot of opportunity in this industry. If you know any young folks looking to get into a solid employment opportunity for the next few years, communications infrastructure is it.
We're lucky enough to touch the carriers, the towercos, and the contractors on a daily basis, and the positivity is pretty high right now. So that's a really good spot to be. I think other than a number of the folks that I work with that are frustrated they can't get on a plane currently, once that goes away, there's a lot more to get out into the field. But from a tower co and a carrier side, I would say the positivity about Q3, Q4, and 2021 are nothing but excitement. From the contractor side, dealing with adding people, I know our company has added people as well during COVID, but I think that they're excited about the possibility that there'll be additional entrance to the workplace. I think that that's something, if they can take advantage of it and get additional folks who might not have been in the communications industry into it, based on the current unemployment situation, that's going to be a real advantage for the industry.
We have one question from the audience regarding the potential or the prospect of a second wave. If that happens, would you do anything differently second time around than we did the first time?
I think we're seeing the second wave right now,
Okay.
in some form or fashion. And I think going through the early days in March and April has really prepared us to react on a more timely basis and effectively. As I mentioned, you know, early on, didn't see many impacts out west. New York was the epicenter. Now it's sort of the other way around. So all the lessons learned in, you know, procurement of PPE and work rules obviously are throughout the company, but more relevant now out west as New York recovers.
Yeah, I think as far as the second wave goes for us, it's not about wanting to get the work done. I think the work will continue. It's about having the equipment, the not capacity, but the ability to get everything you need to a site to make it happen, including the people. That's going to be the challenge of a second wave. If we're in the middle of it now, that's still a struggle. Are the antennas available? Is the safety gear available? Is everything you need to make it happen on the table? And can it be sourced and moved to site in time to make it happen? And that's going to be a challenge that we continue to fight until this goes away a little bit.
We have another poll we'd like to pose to the audience. This time we were asking them, what do you think the wireless infrastructure investment, where do you think the wireless infrastructure investment will go in the next 6 to 12 months? So let's see what the audience says, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, let's have a look. So a small percentage said it's uncertain. The CapEx guidance is still fuzzy. Positive, and that seems to be the majority of it. Over half the audience has said it looks like new applications and opportunities with new frequencies and technologies. Generally positive. About a third of the audience said it's growing need for wireless services are essential, and then only a very small response going negative on that. So everybody seems to be in sync with what we're talking about as far as the positive aspects moving ahead, demand for new infrastructure, and the work that's going to be required to put it all into place. Anything else to add along those lines?
Yeah, I would just echo a point I made earlier. I think folks are retooling and getting ready for this and kind of putting their money where their mouth is in a lot of different ways and a lot of different segments. So, I think we are seeing, the activity, again, through that retooling. So very much in line with the survey results.
And I'll say in regard to 5G also, we're seeing cities that have been discussing 5G and processes for 5G deployment actually begin to take some action on their plans. It seemed like they were spending a lot of time planning for it. And now, for instance, in New York City, we're seeing a 5G enclosure move through the approvals process. So the cities they fully recognize the importance of it. And now it seems like we're seeing increasingly across the country steps actually being taken to streamline and facilitate the deployment of 5G. So that's definitely a positive step.
Have you run into any COVID-19 5G conspiracy theories that have thrown us off?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes?
I'll be honest, this is a topic I never thought I'd have to address in all my years of external relations work and municipal approvals work. But yes, we have. We've seen 5G concerns, specifically 5G concerns related to the spread of coronavirus, pop up in a number of occasions. And we've seen actual on-the-ground delays due to those concerns in a couple of locations. So it has been a problem in some areas. One that luckily we've been able to work through for the most part through the same engagement that we do and for most of our projects, where we reach out to elected and other officials early on in the process. We provide information regarding what it is that we're doing, information necessary to address those concerns, and provide some education, and then make ourselves available as a resource. And in some cases, it's so that they can tell their constituents that they've explored it and looked into it. In other cases, it's a genuine interest. You can't really tell going into it. But we've been able to largely address those concerns to the extent that you can, and move past the initial delays that we've encountered. Now, there's always going to be some folks that you just can't satisfy. They're going to stick to conspiracy theory, and there's not much you can do about that. But for the ones who are willing to listen, and it seems like by far elected officials are open to information, you can provide them information and get them to the point where you've made them comfortable with proceeding. So yeah, unfortunately, I never thought we'd see that. Luckily, we haven't seen much actual damage to our facilities, knock on wood right now, so far, but like we've seen in some other places, primarily in Europe. But we have seen it on the review and permitting side of things, delays due to concerns.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think the misunderstanding between 5G, COVID, and RF has caused for some proactivity in the response. You've seen everything from as harmless as a nasty email to some very unfortunate incidents on tower sites that what we hope aren't a wave of the future or anything to be concerned about moving forward, but they definitely are on people's radar. I know Nate, the National Association of Tower Rectors, is planning documentation and videos to relate to this subject to try and create some public awareness to help feed the public more accurate information on what it actually is and how it works, and hopefully take some proactive steps to change the perception of some of the conspiracy theories.
We had a question here regarding supply chain and supply chain shortages, and the question is, how should companies deal with these shortages, and can software such as Giuseppe, what you provide, can it help with those, mitigating some of those shortages, or at least keeping track of it and managing the supply chain?
Yeah, I think, what we see is some folks are great about forecasting their work, which also allows them to forecast material needs and really have a good grip on ordering and all, and all the related activities that come with it. I think it starts there, right? I think having a grip on your forecast and your material needs as much as is the most important, and then working with your suppliers to ensure you're prioritized seems to be the solution for most of our customers. But it starts with a forecast, and it's easier said than done. But I think that's the first step.
Giuseppe, I want to know who those great forecasters are, because I want an introduction to those.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we gave out hand sanitizer as a marketing item a while ago, and it was like a huge hit. Now I feel like bad that I did that.
Not toilet paper?
I think that's one of the things that we do to provide value, and it's because our contractors, I know they struggle to figure out what's coming through the pipeline and what's going to be next for them. So we work with them directly to anticipate that and try and have what they need around based on the industry forecast as a whole. And it may be this contractor instead of that one, but reading the situation, reading regionally where we might need to have stuff, and making that happen so that when the button is pushed, it's available. That's a 6 months ahead of time thing for us. And if people continue to think that way and forecast better, as Giuseppe said, that's going to make a world of difference in the telecom world and making things happen faster.
We have another question here. With projected growth, are there plans to utilize third-party entities to accommodate the need?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. At Hylan, we tend to prefer to self-perform the work we do on behalf of our carrier and infrastructure partners. So, but we do reach out to third-party subcontractors for flex when we need to either move a project more quickly or do work outside our core geographies. So we will work with third parties to add capacity when needed, with a general preference to self-perform, because we can control the work better from a quality and timeliness standpoint.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll echo Joe's comment that, because we conduct ourselves the same, where we prefer to keep things in-house if we can, but we do subcontract out the construction work and to some extent the permitting work as well. And we engage local consultants, local counsel where necessary if we encounter a particularly difficult jurisdiction or an area that we've just never done work in before, to bring ourselves up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we definitely engage outside help.
Okay, very good. Well, we're coming up to the end of our discussion, gentlemen. I want to give you all an opportunity to voice some closing remarks and sort of wrap up your thoughts on the topic of where we are with the industry today, and what things look like going forward. But Giuseppe, why don't you just give us some thoughts on as we close up here.
Yeah, sure. You know, I'll comment on kind of one of the points I made earlier. I think it's a really interesting time where there's a lot of work around the corner, and everyone's really, ensuring that their workforce is in a good spot to handle that work, and that they have the tools they have in place. So I think we're at a really interesting point where, we're about to see an increase in volume, and I think folks are ready for it. So that's our view, and I think it's kind of every section of this industry. And the one thing we're always keeping an eye on is if there's enough talented people to work in this industry, and echo some of the comments made earlier that we need to do everything we can to train younger folks to come into this industry to help meet this demand in all these different roles. So I think the volume's coming, and I do think the number one problem is skilled headcount at all different levels and all different areas.
Sure.
Yeah, so listen, first of all, I'd just like to give a shout out to all the employees at Hylan who've worked through this pandemic under, challenging circumstances, especially the men and women in the field who have had to, do the hard work under very uncertain circumstances. It's the first global pandemic I've lived through, so we were all figuring it out on the fly, and I think the team has responded really well. With respect to, the future, I'm an optimist, as we talked about earlier. I think the macro trend in the business, nobody's using less bandwidth. Nobody's going back to, dial up. Everybody wants more and more. And the applications that are being developed, we couldn't even envision them, 10 years ago, that are sucking up all the bandwidth that we could supply today. So I think, whether it's 5G, whether it's further fiber deployments, we're at the beginning of a large build cycle, and we're very proud to be part of it.
Yeah, we're in a 100-year pandemic, Joe. I think the last one was in 1918. So
I'm not quite that old.
You have not lived through this before. John.
I guess I just kind of copy off the last two, but add a personal note that not only is it pretty cool to be in an industry that's essential, but that it's this tough. We work with people every day that are contractors in the field, and we mentioned the word resiliency, and that's perfect. Their tenacity, resilience, whatever you want to call it, to get things done and make things happen through this. Field workers, people that are stepping out of their comfort zone and evolving as businesses. It's just, it's amazing. I talk to so many people that are in other industries that don't see that same thing right now. So it goes beyond being essential and goes straight to being tough. And that's what I would classify the people that we work with on a daily basis.
Excellent. Michael, you have the last word.
Right. I hope I'll make it a good one. I just want to echo everybody's comments that, yeah, we've certainly seen issues, challenges, delays due to the emergency, but it's entirely due to the strength, resiliency, commitment, dedication of the folks at ExteNet and our industry partners and the industry as a whole, that we've largely been able to get through it. We've largely been able to conduct ourselves and our activities almost as close to business as usual as you can get in these circumstances. And that just speaks to the industry and the strength of the industry. But also, I think it speaks to the essential nature of what it is that we do. And that will, I expect, to fully continue well into the future. The demand is there. As Joe mentioned, it's not going anywhere. And we look forward to being a part of that.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, all for interesting discussion and commentary and perspectives. We do live in a probably one of the best industries around. I've been in it a long time, and it's always it never gets old. So we do appreciate your different takes on where we are today and where we're headed. I think we have a lot of optimism to look forward to, and all the stars are lining up to some extent that. This rollout that we're undergoing now is going to be a positive for all of us. So I thank the audience for joining us today. I'll leave you with just a little wrap up on how to reach our panelists and their website. Oops, hold on. I'm going to share the screen. There we go. So you can reach each of these companies. Their website is shown here. And if you have questions, you want to know more about the products and services they provide, please reach out to them directly. We will be posting the recording of this webinar on our website. We'll let everyone know when it's available. And we are planning another session probably in October timeframe, a topic of which we'll make an announcement on in the next week or so. But I appreciate everyone's participation today. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.